This video is all about writing our own custom middleware. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to write your very own custom middleware. But why do we want to do this? Well, we can write our own custom middleware to add functionality needed by our applications that Express does not provide. Out of the box, we don't get everything we actually need from Express. We get a lot of really cool functionality and a way to organize our code and a really robust API, but there's oftentimes that are just kind of common things that are found in web servers that we need to modify and write on our own. And Express thought about that beforehand and was like, why would we make that decision for you as a developer, how you write your own code? They made decisions about a lot of other things, but they gave us a lot of freedom to write and extend the package on its own. So this powerful feature it makes it really easy to extend the Express framework without the need to modify its source code. We'll see two examples of two different types of middleware that we're going to call regular middleware and error handling middleware. So writing custom middleware is a two-step process. First and foremost, we just write a function that can receive 3 or 4 arguments. 3 arguments for regular middleware and 4 arguments for error handling middleware. Then we add that function to the middleware queue. It's really that simple. So let's take an example here, a custom logger function that we can kind of build to log out information about requests that are coming into our API. This function takes in the rec, res, and then this new next object. Okay, so we have the 2 regular homies and then their third-party best friend next. Okay, rec and res are objects and next is a callback function. Notice what we're doing here with our logger function is that we're just simply console logging a string that is pulling in information about who is working with and when they're working with our server. So we get a brand new date, we get a timestamp of exactly when this log happened. We get a request method, so what type of request was used. And then we get a request URL, where did that, what URL, what endpoint was used to be communicating with. And then the last is we get the origin. Where did this come from? The IP address or the origin from where this user used our API. Then we call the next function. So look at the things here. We're going to kind of recap. This function is taking in 3 parameters, rec, res, and next. Remember, next is a function that tells Express, so when it's invoked on that last line of our function here, it's being invoked and it's saying we're ready to move into the next middleware in the queue. So it's a callback. You can name it whatever you like, but please, for the love, stick with next. That is the common convention for what this callback function is. So just like rec and res are just placeholders that you're going to use, they're conventionally used as the homies, rec and res objects. Next is the next argument. So remember, middleware can modify the rec and res objects, but it doesn't have to. Our example isn't modifying anything, it's simply just logging. All it's doing is just logging out a string. And then we call next and go into the next middleware function. So middleware can actually stop requests by sending responses back to the requester or the client that made the request. Here's a strong emphasis on next. Calling next will signal to Express that the middleware has finished and it should call the next middleware function. So as a developer, you call next to say, I'm done with what I'm doing in this function block. I need to move into the next function block. Okay? If next is not called, a response is not sent back to the client, the request will simply just hang and clients will get a timeout error. So make sure to always call next when you need to call next. Okay? If not, use one of the methods that send the response back like res.send or res.json. So that's time to plug it all in. It's time to write our own custom middleware and see how it all works together. Okay, so I just went ahead and I opened up our little Hobbits application. We're going to use a couple of different types of middleware here that kind of get this point across. Okay, so I actually want you to type out that logger middleware that we just saw from the slide deck example. And the way that we're going to do that is we're just going to name so notice that right here I'm writing custom middleware. So it's a little message to myself that the next functions here are custom middleware. So we're going to call this logger. It's going to take in rec, res, and next. Okay. And we're just going to simply console.log. And we're going to follow the convention here with the template literal string. And we're going to make this format nice and neatly. So inside of our little brackets here, which are just going to be stringified brackets, it's not an array, it's just in the template literal string. We're going to say new date, since we can just write custom JavaScript, and then we're going to change that to a nicely formatted date. ToIsoString is a method on the date object that we can use to do that. And then we're going to say the rec.method. So the thing that was used to request this middleware. We're going to say to rec.url where the middleware was requested. And then where the middleware was requested from is the last. And we can call this little getter. And we can just get the origin off of that request object. And notice that I just auto-formatted my code, just auto-formatted for me. So now we're going to actually plug this in globally to our application here. So this logger function is something that we actually want to use at the top level of our API. Why would we want that? Well, we want this available to all of our routes here, just like express.json is. Okay. Now we're going to just say server.use logger. And let's find out what happens when we don't call next, so that when you see the error or lack thereof, you'll just get it. It'll make more sense. Let's go ahead and terminate the process and hit yarn start. Let's go over to our code. I'm going to call localhost 5000. And in our browser, I'll pull this up right away. So go over to your web browser, call localhost 5000, and look what happens. We're just hanging up right here. That's the problem. We didn't call next. So anytime that this happens, you're going to get a request that just spins and spins and spins and spins, because Express has no clue where to go from this point. It's invoking this logger function and then doing nothing. So that's why Express is super important. But notice what we're getting in our console. We're getting this awesome little timestamp, and then this get to blank, and then our origin was actually undefined because we don't have that communication piece going back and forth yet. So what we need to do is make sure that we call next. Okay, let's go and restart our server so that we can stop giving this such a hard time. And notice that we invoke the function and check it out. We are getting next. I'm not quite sure why origin is undefined. I would have to do a little bit of debugging to figure that out. Maybe I have a typo in the code. Looks like it's just straight from, oh, that's why. There's two eyes. So a little bit of debugging there. Go and refresh the server. Let's go back and invoke that route. And still not quite there. So probably something, origin. That's why. Ha. Let's go ahead and restart the server. And go ahead and request. And still undefined. Okay, cool. We're just going to leave it at that for now. Okay. All right. So this is good and all. We now have a custom logger. We can learn all about our different, URLs that we want to request. If we went and did hobbits, get the hobbits back. We're getting information every single time we're using our server. Our logger is telling us what's going on behind the scenes. So it's really nice. That's a really good way to use custom middleware. But now what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a middleware that we can plug into our application that just kind of lets us, kind of figure things out together. Okay. So we are going to build some middleware. So remember this, any middleware in our queue can stop the request and send a response back to the client. When that happens, the rest of the middleware, including the route handlers, will not be executed. Okay? So we're going to see this by action by writing our very own authentication middleware. But first, we need a little bit of a story. So any similarity to an existing story that you may or may not have learned is pure coincidence. Imagine you're next to a lake where a dangerous creature dwells, and it is moving towards you with ill intentions. Luckily, next to you is a sealed door that leads to safety. Unfortunately, in order to open it, you need to provide the right password. So we're going to implement an API for that. We're going to start by defining a function that shows our current predicament at the console as the application loads. Okay? So we're going to write a little custom middleware function here. We're going to say function and we're going to call it @gate. Okay? Remember, it's middleware, rec, res, and next need to all be defined inside of our arguments here. And inside of here, we're going to just simply call console.log. And we're going to write the string at the gate about to be eaten. All right. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we don't hang up our process by calling next. So now we're going to plug that in and we're just going to say server.use @gate. This is what's called global or application-wide middleware. Remember, I've been using that term constantly, but I just wanted to remind you of that. It's going to apply to every single endpoint in our server. Accessing any route in our server should display the message in the console. Okay? So now let's add our authentication middleware. So that's going to only let us in if we hit the correct route. Picking any other route is futile, so be careful. So we're going to make another piece of middleware here. We're going to say function. This is going to be an authentication function. I'm just going to call it auth for short. And I want you to think about the 3 parameters that we need to add this function. Rec, res, and of course, next. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say if rec.url equals melon is going to be our password. Then we're going to say next. Else, we are going to say res.send. You shall not pass. So we have our little authenticator middleware. That's only going to fire when we request the route melon. Interesting. How do we make that happen? Well, we know how to apply middleware globally to all of our routes. Well, we need to build a route that is going to be a GET request, and it's going to be to melon, and then we're going to just make it like all of our other routes where we have rec and res. And in this, we're going to console.log gate opening console.log again inside and safe. And then lastly, we want to res.send our welcome message to the traveler. Okay. What's going to happen here though? Right now, if we were to request melon, we're just going to simply run these logs. How do we tell this particular route to be concerned with the auth middleware? Well, we've been using this to plug everything in globally, but that's not what we want here. We have our little @gate function that's going to fire at every single request, but we only want auth to fire if melon is requested because that's what it's doing. It's checking to see if the route that was requested is actually melon. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this middleware into our GET. And that is how you set up middleware to be applied at the local route level instead of at the global application level. And you can do this as many times as you want. You can have as many middleware between the route and your last middleware or request handler as you would like. So let's check out what happens here. So we're going to go ahead and refresh our server. Start it up. Head over to Hobbits. And notice that as we requested Hobbits, we got this at the gate about to be eaten. Let's see what happens now when we request melon. Hey, we got that nice message back from our server. We hit the gate opening because we're at the gate about to be eaten. Gate opening, inside and safe, and then we got the message back. Let's walk through that process. And it may take you a couple of times of repeating this next part kind of over and over again. So feel free to pause the video, go back, and pause the video and go back. But we're going to look at this programmatically and see kind of what's going on here. Notice that when we requested our first route to Hobbits, we got that message at the gate about to be eaten. But we weren't requesting melon, so nothing else happened. Our authentication middleware is only plugged into the melon route. So when we requested melon at this point, we said we're at the gate about to be eaten. And then gate opening, inside and safe. And of course, welcome traveler. So let's look at it in the code. Melon was requested. Then immediately we went into the auth middleware. Auth middleware looked and said, hey, was the requested URL actually melon? And if that's the case, we're going to say next. Okay, so this is exactly what happened when we requested melon. Next went into the next middleware, which is this function right here. And it said gate opening, inside and safe, and then we got the welcome traveler message. Let's plug in our auth middleware to our Hobbits endpoint, and let's see what happens. Normally our Hobbits endpoint was going to send back this list of Hobbits. Okay? Let's see what happens with auth getting in the way of that. Say we don't know the right password, which is melon. Let's go reset the server. Refresh the page to Hobbits. Uh-oh. We actually were not able to pass. So we were at the gate, about to be eaten. We can assume that we were eaten. So that is kind of a fun little example of how middleware can affect your program. It is all about how you place it, all about writing things programmatically so that it can be placed properly. Let's restart the server. And we're now able to function within our application properly. All because of where we place the authentication middleware. Okay? So go ahead, and if that was confusing to you, just rewatch it a few times and it'll start getting more and more clear. You have to just do this stuff over and over again and kind of understand what you're programmatically doing. And you want to think about your routes and your route handlers in terms of this program that you're just writing a function block, calling next, going to the next function block, returning a response, or calling next. Those are kind of your only options. Return a response or call next, return a response or call next. And it all depends on what you want your middleware to be doing. Thank you so much for tuning in. I promise as you get more and more repetition, more at-bats with this stuff, it's going to become more and more clear as you continue to grow and develop.